All right, we're going to spend more detail on the reproduction of flowering plants. We'll try to get the general overview because this one gets to be a tough one. But our essential question here, we can kind of go with our subtitle here, but basically, how do flowering plants reproduce? And we should know that our flowering plants are angiosperms at this point. So all of the flower parts that we know of, so flowers typically have 4 types of modified leaves. So these would be leaves that were modified. So first we have our sepals, and they would enclose and protect the bud. So these guys are usually, if you see like a little flower, they're kind of the leaves underneath them because they've kind of protected the bud ahead of time. But these are those sepals. Our petals are the colorful, fragrant advertisers to pollinators, so the petals should be the things that we know. Stamens, just so we remember, there are kind of male parts of the flower that have the word men in it. Okay, it has a stalk, that's our filament, and it's tipped with an anther. These have sacs which produce pollen via meiosis. Again, remember, pollens are a whole gametophyte, so we can produce those spores by meiosis, but then there'll be a little bit extra to get it to be our whole gametophyte. There's not a whole lot to it, so it doesn't take much, right? It's sort of like a spore, but not entirely. The base of the carpel is the ovary. Wait, we got switched up here, didn't we? Anyways, those are the stamen. If we have, I just looked at this, we got all kinds of things at the wrong end here. Anyways, this is the male part. So this part is with our carpels. I've just realized this. Isn't that funny? My bad. Anyways, so that's the whole male part. Female parts are the carpels. They have a long, slender neck called the style, and there's a sticky stigma at the tip of it. Then at the base of that carpel will be the ovary, so at the end of the style will be the ovary, which has ovules, which will be the developing egg and supporting cells. We also use the term pistil to sometimes refer to a single carpel or fused carpels. So you can see carpel and pistil are kind of the same. My bad on that. This bullet point should definitely go under there. Oops. Mistakes have to be made. But a good example, we could look at this one later. I know it's not going to play in here while I'm recording, but those right there are our sepals. Hopefully you see that. A whole bunch of flowers. So we've got our petals. If we look in here closely, we'd be able to see some carpels and some anthers, some stamen. Well, we're going to look at those a little later, so don't forget to bring your flower for the next class period. Again, the sepals down here below, the petals are the things that we know, the stamen. The male parts have that anther, and then the filament. And for our carpel, or also pistil, is what it's also sometimes called, so pistil. We have a stigma, the sticky stigma, the style, which is our tube there, and the ovary, which will eventually become our fruit. So in the life cycle of a generalized angiosperm, and that's really what we're going to go with, is just generalized. So fertilization occurs with an ovule, or in an ovule within the flower. The ovary will develop into the fruit. It's a key point. The ovule will develop into seeds containing the embryo. The fruit protects the seeds and aids in dispersing it. Completing the life cycle, the seed will then germinate or begin to grow in a suitable habitat. The embryo develops into a seedling, which makes eventually a mature plant. So this one would be a good one to know. If nothing else about the life cycle can we get, we should know this part for sure. Okay, well, we'll look at those a little later on. But here's a good look at it. So we have the developing embryo of a fruit. Eventually, it's going to be kind of our seed. All right, it will, in the right area, it will germinate. Okay, it will grows into a seedling, which is just like a baby plant, and eventually become a mature plant. It's fine it doesn't start at 1 because it's a whole cycle, right? But our mature plant with our developing embryo, that's kind of how that happens and works. Okay, it develops, becomes a fruit, the fruit has a seed, the seed germinates, you know, all the way around. So, plant life cycles involve alternating diploid and haploid generations. So this is a review of the alternation of generations. Okay, the diploid plant is our sporophyte, so hopefully remember that our sporophyte is 2N. Specialized diploid cells in the anthers and ovules undergo meiosis to produce haploid spores. The haploid spores undergo mitosis to produce a haploid generation, right? That thing is called the gametophyte because it's our gamete-producing plant that is 1N. Fertilization, the gametes from male and female gametophytes unite to form a zygote. So this is really alternation of generations in words. So if you like that one, this is a really good way to visualize or at least write out alternation of generation in words. Again, that's the very general kind of way. So look at it, see if that works for you. Then we get into this monstrosity, all right? So we're going to have alternation of generations, but it's going to happen within this plant. So we'll take one piece at a time. All right. So it's a pollen grain. It's kind of a takeout from that. So basically what happens in the anther, all right, which is our male part, all right, so our male gametophyte. So a cell within the anther undergoes meiosis to produce haploid spores. The spores are within one single area. One of those single spores will undergo mitosis, just not a whole ton of mitosis for each of those spores, and produce this teensy little pollen grain. So maybe it undergoes mitosis like a couple of times and produces a pollen grain. Because remember, the pollen grain is our male gametophyte. It's our whole gametophyte plant. It's our whole plant, just in a teensy tiny little casing. Okay? So that's how we make our male gametophyte. Really, it just makes meiosis from one, so the same thing, and then one of those will undergo like a couple of mitoses and become a pollen grain. Doesn't take many. All right. For the female, in the ovule, what happens is we'll undergo meiosis to produce a haploid spore. It's still within there. Okay. That one little guy right here will undergo mitosis to become an embryo sac. Again, it's not like it's got like 3 things going on. So it's like, what does it do? Like 2 mitosis rounds? It doesn't do very many. So that's where our kind of female gametophyte is. So our whole male and female plants are still encased within these parts. So this is still our female gametophyte right here. Okay. So what happens is that the whole male plant here, gametophyte, will land at the sticky stigma of the female parts. And it'll actually sort of have to undergo, it'll grow, that's some sort of like mitosis type stuff, but it'll grow down and it will eventually enter into the tube. I guess it goes around and goes to the opening this way. Excuse me. So it goes through the bottom. And notice we've got 2 little like sperm cells that are coming to the opening. So those will actually fertilize and will fertilize with the egg to form a diploid zygote, and it'll form with like the endosperm as well. So you get, because this is diploided here, so you get this 3 in endosperm, which is really just to kind of help fuel the developing zygote. So it's like, I don't know, kind of like food for the developing zygote. So food for development. So that we call double fertilization. And that is tricky. All right. So let's sort of look at what happens in words, just so we get the idea really quickly. Pollen grains are our male gametophytes. The cells that develop into pollen grains are found in the anthers. Each cell undergoes meiosis, forming 4 haploid spores. Each spore will divide by mitosis, forming haploid cells, okay, called the tube cell and the generative cell. So basically, our whole gametophyte is like two cells. Look, it's a tube cell and a generative cell. So your entire male gametophyte is made of like two cells. The generative cell passes to the tube cell and the thick wall forms around them. So that's our pollen grain, which is ready for release. A female gametophyte is an embryo sac. Okay. So the cell of the ovule undergoes meiosis to produce 4 haploid spores. 3 of the spores will degenerate and just kind of die off. We don't need them. The surviving spore undergoes a mitotic division to produce an embryo sac. That's our female gametophyte. Okay, that's the big part to know there is what that gametophyte is. The sac contains a large central cell with 2 haploid nuclei. One of its other cells is a haploid egg ready to be fertilized. Okay, so it's the whole thing in words. Pollination is the transfer of pollen from the anther to the stigma. Pollen can be carried by wind, water, animals, whatever. After pollination, the pollen grain germinates to the stigma, so it grows down the stigma and through the style. The tube cell gives rise to a pollen tube, which grows downward into the ovary. Meanwhile, the generative cell divides by mitosis and gives us 2 sperm. So it's a complicated little process. Again, we're interested in the flower parts and sort of the general idea of what happens with alternation and generation, but we also might want to be able to apply a few things. Like we know an embryo sac is going to be our female gametophyte, and the pollen is a male gametophyte. And so this process of alternation and generation still applies as long as we know those. The rest of it's our sporophyte. So when the pollen tube reaches the base, it enters an ovary and discharges 2 sperm near the embryo sac. 1 sperm fertilizes the egg, forming a diploid zygote. The other contributes its haploid nucleus to a large diploid central cell of the embryo sac. Okay. This now, with a triploid nucleus, will give rise to a food-storing tissue called endosperm. So it just is going to feed our zygote. Formation of the diploid zygote and a triploid nucleus is what we call double fertilization. The resulting product of endosperm is unique to angiosperms. So this is unique for angiosperms. They're the only ones that experience that endosperm. Endosperm will develop only in ovules containing a fertilized egg, thereby preventing angiosperms from squandering nutrients. All right, so we can look at this. There's a cool thing with a bat pollinating an agave plant. We can look at bee pollination, and we'll look at some videos of plant fertilization and how that actually works. Okay. So we've got the fertilization part of things, so this might be a good place to take a break and then come back. So after fertilization, that ovule containing the triploid central cell and diploid zygote begin to develop into a seed. So our ovule becomes the seed. That's the key point here. The seed stockpiles proteins, oil, starches, all kinds of stuff. Embryonic development begins when the zygote divides by mitosis into 2 cells. Repeated division of the cells then produces a ball of cells that become the embryo. Meanwhile, the triploid cell divides to form a thread of cells that anchors the embryo to the parent plant, pushes the embryo through the endosperm. Lots and lots of details. The big idea here is that we're going to start to get a seed developed here in the ovule. So that's the big part to know. Ovule will lead to seeds. All those details are fine not to know. Okay. The result of the embryonic development of the ovule is a mature seed. That's the result. That's the key point. Okay. Near the end of its maturation, the seed loses most of its water and forms a hard-resistant seed coat. And that's just the outside of a seed. Keep it going. So seed dormancy, so good to note, is a condition in which growth and development are suspended temporarily. It's a key evolutionary adaptation. So these guys can just wait. They don't grow, they don't develop, they don't do anything. They just wait. Okay, so this dormancy allows time for a plant to disperse its seeds. So for dispersal, it increases the chance that a new generation of plants will begin to grow when the environmental conditions such as temperature and moisture favor survival. So it is a really good thing to just sit and wait until the right conditions arise. Okay, in a eudicot, like a bean, the embryo is elongated with 2 thick cotyledons and no endosperm. So we don't really have an endosperm because its cotyledons absorb the endosperm nutrients as the seed forms. So we'll talk about what that looks like. But that's another key difference is eudicots don't have endosperm. Monocots, like a kernel of corn, actually contain a fruit containing 1 seed. Unlike the bean, the corn seed contains lots of endosperm and a single thin cotyledon. So we can sort of see what it looks like. Here's a bean. These are actually the 2 cotyledons here, and so there's not really any endosperm there. In the monocot, we may have 1 cotyledon, and we'll actually still have the endosperm to kind of add nutrition. While the seeds are developing from ovules, hormonal changes triggered by fertilization cause flower's ovary to grow, thicken, mature. So a fruit is a mature ovary. That part is key. Housing the protected seeds and helping disperse them from the parent plant. So although a fruit typically consists of a mature ovary, it can include other flower parts as well. So a pea pod is a fruit that holds the peas. So there's a thing that we'll look at with those, but you can see the pea pod here, okay, holding those seeds. All right, so matches the part of the pea flower to what would be the pod. Okay, so if we see in the developing pea plant, here's kind of the upper part. These seeds are the ovules. The ovary wall is kind of the outside pod. And you can see here, there's just a bit of that sepal left. So this is a good one to kind of see that developing fruit. Mature fruits may be fleshy or dry. Oranges, plums, grapes are examples of fleshy fruits, in which the wall of the ovary is soft during ripening. Dry fruits are like beans and nuts and grains, so they're dry, wind dispersal fruits of grasses, harvested while on the plant, are a major staple of foods for people. So lots of good food by fruits. So these are fleshy fruits, and these are dry. Guess I could actually write fleshy. Should seem obvious, but these are still fruits as well, even though we consider them nuts. They're still fruits. And maple, that's our little maple fruits. Well, I've seen those. I'm sure you have as well. Various adaptations of plants help disperse seeds. Seeds of some flowering plants like dandelions and maples are contained within fruits that function like kites or propellers. Coconuts are adapted for dispersal by water, so they kind of float a little bit. Many angiosperms rely on animals to carry the seeds clinging to their fur or ingested with fruits, so sometimes they have to go through a whole digestive tract before they can even germinate. At germination, a seed takes up water and then restarts the growth and development temporarily suspended while in dormancy. In eudicot seeds like beans, the embryonic root emerges first. So the root emerges first and grows upward, germinating the seed, and then the shoots emerge from the soil and it's kind of hooked downward to protect it. So sort of what that looks like. And we've seen, I hope you've seen kind of a bean grow, but we've got our shoot kind of starting first, but it's sort of downward with the roots, is that it'll eventually come up and hook out and protect the seed. But you can sort of see that root there first, and then our shoots are kind of hooking it up. For corn and other monocots, it's different. So the protective sheath surrounding the shoot pushes upward. So the shoots just come up. The shoot tips then grow up through a tunnel of the protective sheath, and the corn cotyledon remains in the soil and decomposes. Come on. So you can see here, it just, it goes up and it goes down. Pretty simple. We see our first sort of seed leaf there. Okay, so a little bit different growth between monocots and dicots as well. Asexual reproduction is also a vegetative, called vegetative propagation. We won't really use that term, but it's an asexually reproducing offspring called a clone. and it's genetically identical to its single parent. So asexual reproduction in angiosperms and other plants is an extension of their capacity to grow throughout life. So remember, they have indeterminate growth, so they could just grow continuously. Asexual reproduction in a plant often involves fragmentation or the separation of a parent plant into parts to develop into whole plants. So a garlic bulb is actually an underground stem that functions in storage. A single large bulb fragments into several parts called cloves, and each clove can give rise to a separate plant as indicated by the green shoots emerging from them. Okay. So if you let them kind of grow too long, so each of these can form its own plant in a garlic bulb. Each of the small trees that you're about to see is a sprout from the roots of a coast redwood tree. So each small tree develops its own root system separate from the parent. So each of these guys that's like small in here is sort of part of the whole big redwoods. A ring of plants as a clone from the creosote bushes growing in the Mojave Desert in California. All of these bushes are from generations of asexual reproduction of roots. So this whole little ring of these guys, they're all root connected. Some aspen groves consist of thousands of trees descended by asexual reproduction from the root system of a single plant. So an aspen grove would look kind of like that. All these guys may be, from one parent plant. All right, might be a good place to take a break. If you need another break, pause the video and then come right back. Make sure you're chunking those notes or writing questions out to the left side. Start on your summaries if you need to. Just take a bit of a break. So the ability of plants to reproduce asexually provides many opportunities for growers to reproduce large numbers of plants with not a whole lot of effort or expense. Most of our fruit trees and household plants are asexually propagated from cuttings. Raspberries are propagated from root sprouts. Potatoes are from pieces of underground stems, so cutting those tubers. Most varieties of wine grapes are produced by grafting a bud of one plant into a closely related plant. Plants can also be cultured on specialized media and tubes. Some of that agar stuff that we did we grew nasty things on. You can actually take a different set of agar and start to grow plants on it. I have done that. Sort of like this. That's sort of like that gel stuff that you guys used. I did them on petri dishes, but they can grow just as fine. Either way. Some plants can survive a very long time. Those coast redwoods are about 2,000 to 3,000 years old. A tree that we'll see is about to see is about 4,600 years old. It's a bristlecone pine. A long life increases evolutionary fitness by increasing the number of reproductive opportunities. So for these guys, it's the longer they live, just because that offers them more opportunities to reproduce. Okay, so here's a really old tree. Wonder what it's seen in its 4,600 years on this planet. Okay. Several adaptations allow some plants to live much longer than animals. Adult trees, like adult plants, retain meristems, which allow them to continue growth and repair throughout their lives. A tree can thus replace organs that have been lost or damaged by trauma or disease. Thick wood can protect against insects and disease and even periodic fires, as with thick bark protecting redwoods and sequoias. They kind of even need some fire sometimes to grow. Okay, so we did fly through some of that stuff because I do want you to focus more on kind of general stuff and how some of what we're talking about applies to this. But if you have any questions at all, shoot me an email. We'll work through it. We'll get it. All right.